This is Pet Life Radio. Let's talk pets.
Welcome to Aquarium Mania. I'm your host, Dr. Roy Anong, speaking to you from the University of Florida's Tropical Aquaculture Laboratory. Thanks for joining us. Cichlids are a beautiful and highly diverse group of fishes in the aquarium hobby that come primarily from Africa and the Americas. Cichlids from the Americas, known as New World cichlids, include angelfish, discus, and oscars. But these species are just the tip of the iceberg. One of the largest groups is the Cyclosoma complex, including the Salvini, lowland, redhead, and firemouth cichlids. Don Conkle is the owner of Don Conkle's Tropicals, based near Tampa, Florida, with additional facilities in Costa Rica and Mexico. Don is a leading cichlid authority and published author and has been breeding cichlids since 1975. He currently specializes in production and importation of the American cichlids from North and Central America, including those of the Cyclosoma complex. He also works with endangered fish species in these areas. Join us as we talk to Don about his business, his favorite fish, and what hobbyists need to know to succeed with these species. We'll be right back after these messages.
It's DesignerPetSweaters.com. Hand-knitted designer sweaters for your precious pup or cool cat. Beautiful couture patterns for your pets, including custom-knitted formal wear, casual wear, yachting, and even sports-themed. Many designer pet sweaters include feathered tammy hats, top hats, and a lot of sparkle. Each sweater includes leg loops, front paw sleeves, and leash opening. Visit DesignerPetSweaters.com to order your four-legged fashions today. Your pets will stay warm for the winter and be runway ready. Large or small, we fit them all. DesignerPetSweaters.com.
Let's Talk Pets on PetLifeRadio.com.
Welcome back to Aquarium Mania on Pet Life Radio. My guest today is Don Conkle, owner and operator of Don Conkle's Tropicals. Hi, Don. Thanks again for being with us today.
Appreciate it.
So, you've got such a long history in the hobby, and I know you've been breeding fish for decades. What first got you involved in the hobby?
Well, in 1972, I'd grown up here in Florida since 1967, and I was involved in electrocution, an accident where I lost half of my left front foot. During June 1972, I was in the hospital for 7 months, and I had to return home to my parents, where I laid in bed for the next 6 months. During that time, my father bought me an aquarium, and he went out and purchased me one pair of large red devils, the Midas cichlid, the citronellus, and I had bred them, and it was a source of entertainment. It helped me medically. It helped me mentally recover during those recuperation years.
It sounds like the aquarium and the red devils were really great therapy for you then, Don.
That's correct.
And so going from breeding this pair to your huge operation, how did that happen?
Well, in 1980, I had made a lot of letters. I've been keeping fish between 1972, but in 1976, I bought some property in Odessa, Florida, just north of the airport, about 10 miles. And being I had 10 acres to play with besides horses, I decided I wanted to carry on my love for these tropical fish, so I built a tropical fish hatchery, about 2,000 square foot. Built a bunch of concrete vats and tried to get all the fish that I could. Many of them were live bears at that time, but I found my love to be with cichlids as of their personality. Their coming to the person in the aquarium compared to doing the community tanks that I had acquired the fish from various retail shops in Clearwater, Florida. So then I built this complex, the beginning, my first building, during the 1976 area. And then in 1980, I came into contact with the late Stuart Grant out of Lake Malawi. Stuart had told me, Don, you spend $10,000, you make $100,000 within a year. Well, he wasn't quite correct, but he was very close. I started dealing with the fishes, the cichlids from Lake Malawi during that period of 1980, and started importing the fish and sending them out to most of the farmers. I wasn't connected on a national level at that point, but just a local level, selling to the local fish farms.
Okay. So how did you make the leap from the Africans to the New World cichlids?
Well, as a matter of business, my degree's in business. It wasn't anything to do with microbiology, but I was a naturalist at heart, having the farm. And I realized that it was really instrumental in 1985. Really preceding that, in 1983, I met the late Ross Sokoloff. Ross was like the pioneer those days in Central American cichlids, which he was collecting with Harry Greer in Belize and a little bit of Guatemala. These were big fish. I really liked the personality compared to the African cichlids, who are the flock species. The Central American cichlids bonded off, and I was particularly infatuated with their post-parental bite care. And at that point, there were no exporters in Central America, and I thought, well, what a good thing. I had dealt with 100 species from Africa for the last 3 years, from 80 to 83, and I thought, well, I'll take these expeditions to Central America. At the same time, in 1983 that I met Ross Sokoloff, I came into touch with Dr. Paul Oisel. Paul is one of the ACA, the American Cichlid Association founders, and I employed him to take expeditions with me to Central America to obtain broodstock sources. So we started several expeditions between Mexico and Panama, brought the animals back, and I ventured into Central American cichlids. Then in 1985, I visited Europe at Zoofish. It's one of the big, every 2 years they have their big European shows. And that's when the OFI asked me, I wanted to join the Ornamental Fish Importers Group, and they said, no, you cannot do it. You have exclusivity with Pierre Brichard from Lake Tanganyika and Stuart Grant from Lake Malawi, and we won't allow you to join unless you release that exclusivity. Well, I slept on it all night in Wiesbaden, Germany, and I said, okay, I'll do that. There was another gentleman named Leif de Maison of Old World Cichlids in Homestead, and the agreement was that if I let Leif de Maison come into the American market, that they would allow me to join OFI. Needless to say, I did that to join that group, which was really one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I felt very little value out of the OFI in subsequent years. Nevertheless, during that time period, as Leif had started importing fishes from Lake Malawi, I saw the competition to be great. I saw the fact that Leif was selling to many tropical fish farms in Florida, and as we know, the more farmers there are, the less the profits are. So I expanded more into Central America, into the various countries, because there were no exporters. With my business sense and my mental aptitude, it was a sure thing that these brand new species from Central America were a great lucrative venture for me to go into. So I transferred over to Central American cichlids purely from a business sense, but then realized more and more that the behavior of these fishes would take the United States in a big storm. At that same time period, I started getting away from dealing with tropical fish farmers in Florida and doing all my shipping across the United States and Canada.
Okay. So that explains kind of your transition. What are the fish coming from primarily in terms of countries? Where would you say your major countries of origin are?
Well, basically I have a farm in Jaco, Costa Rica, where we farm cichlids from the Isthmian province. That being the southernmost province in Central America, the water's slightly different than the northern Usumacinta province. I have an export compound in Villahermosa, Mexico, and another in San Pedro Sula, Honduras. So my fishes basically encompass the two great fish regions, the Usumacinta province, which is Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and Belize, and the southernmost fish province, which is the San Juan province of Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama.
Okay. So given that there are so many species of fish, what would you, if you had to choose maybe a couple what are your top maybe 2 or 3 species that you personally like?
Well, personally, I've always liked the fish Carpentus. It's a lacustrine. It's actually a eutrophic fish, meaning that it has many territories. It goes from saltwater out 4 to 5 miles into the Caribbean Ocean, into the rivers of Panuco, into the lakes and the lagoons of Chiril and Escondido near Tampico. It's a brilliant fish that has been as popular since I first brought this animal in '83 as it is today. When I look at the riverine or rheophilic fish from the rivers, I particularly care for the Paraneatropus group, which are Nebuliferus, Bulleri, and Gibiceps. They exhibit marine colors, as most all these cichlids do, because cichlids are, as from Central America and around the world, are secondary pierciforms. They evolved from marine fish into freshwater fish. They have those vibrant, iridescent, and metallic colors that marine fish exhibit, yet they're freshwater oriented.
Okay. So since you mentioned a little bit about your facility, can you describe the facility here in Florida? What are your, I guess, structures for raising the fish? How do they differ between the lake and the riverine species? Can you go into that a little bit?
Sure thing. Well, the lake fish, or the lacustrine fish, basically will take the substrate of here in Tampa, Florida, as well as all of Florida. They're hard water fish. Central America animals have the same requirements, chemistry, water chemistry that we have here in Florida. So it was a natural to do fishes that were easy for me to breed. I had developed 130 ponds in 1986, and the lake fish did very well in them. When I say lake fish, I'm also referring to lower riverine fish. That means rivers that flow below 500 foot of elevation. But the riverine or the whitewater fish, which we call rheophilic fish, they are better bred in cement concrete raceways. A lot of our raceways, I have 50 of them that are 2,500 gallons, and they will not tolerate the high hardness and the calcium concentrate that exists in our earthen Florida ponds. So we must raise our lake and lower river fish in the ponds, and we must raise the whitewater or higher elevated fish into our cement raceways. We have several hatcheries which have been very prone to me, particularly during any cold periods since 1977, as they're all covered with tubular metal and plastic, and our wells are able to maintain a minimum 72 degrees year-round during the worst cold days. Our ponds, our earthen ponds, are covered with plastic and metal, and our temperatures go down to more around 65 to 68 during our coldest periods in the last 30 years. So I differentiate the two animals into those two different types of methods of raising fish.
Is there kind of a general, or I guess it depends on where they're coming from in terms of temperature tolerance? You mentioned a couple of temperatures. What kind of lower limits do the riverine versus the more lake-type fish have?
Well, the riverines, cichlids are found at elevations of 1,500 meters and below. And the fishes that are found roughly at 3,000 feet to 1,000 feet, their temperatures are coming from 72 to 78 degrees. The lake fish, which are the below 1,000 feet, which are rivers, large rivers, and lakes, they like temperatures of 85 to 90 degrees. That reflects our systems that we have. Our ponds get very warm during the summer, basically going up to around 85 to 87 degrees, where our hatcheries stay a bit cooler with the shade cloth and the understory cover that we put on them, so we maintain a year-round temperature of 81. It's our general that we reach for, our general temperature, except during the 3 to 4 months of winter, where they lower down to around 72 to 75. We're able to breed our river fish during the cooler months of the year. We're already breeding them now in January till about April or May. Then they cut out because the temperature becomes too warm at 83 to 85. But then in May through August, our lake fish, which are raised in our earthen ponds, go to work because they love the temperatures around 83 to 85 degrees for maximum breeding temperatures.
Okay, and pretty much all of these are pair spawning, is that correct? Or they pair up?
We do everything in trios, whether it's in the pond or whether it's in the vats. We find that one male will easily accommodate 2 to 3 females, whether it be lake fish or river fish. He'll spawn with one female, then he'll go to the other. That's basically how this works. They are not harem spawners like African cichlids, but nevertheless, they're able to service 2 to 3 females at a time.
Okay, so you kind of cater more to the males. That's just a joke. With regard to some of your endangered species work, can you maybe give us a couple words on that?
Sure. When I started collecting in 1983, there was a vast array of cichlids that were available. The works by Dr. Charles Reagan in 1905, the works of Salvin from the late 1800s, those animals were all still available till 1983 to 1986. The agricultural runoff that has occurred into Central America, which are basically the frontiers, they have decimated the species flocks of several fishes, particularly 2 or 3 of the genuses. Because of that agricultural runoff being basically fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides, we have realized that in the last 20, 25 years that there are 15 to 20 endangered species and 5 to 6 extinct species. In the frontier basin of Panama and Costa Rica, on both the Caribbean and Pacific slopes, being Central America's a land bridge, the longest river is 90 miles long, those populations of all fish in those rivers have disappeared. You'll find snails and you'll find frogs, but you won't find fish. Particularly in the Rio Colorado region of the Pacific drainage in Costa Rica, Panama, there's a fish called lion's eye, which has become extinct. We were very fortunate in 1993 to locate some lion's eye in a canal from a farmer who had not raised a product, which is palm oil. These palm trees, of course, were fertilized and pesticided, and they had ruined about that complete 90-mile region of the Rio Colorado Basin. On the Atlantic side of Pacific Ocean, at the border of Panama and Costa Rica, in the Rio Tellier, there were several fish, Astateros busingi, Astateros ratisma, Archocentrus myrnae, which all had disappeared in a 4 or 5 year plan because of the banana plantations owned by Chiquita. We now supply the government of Costa Rica as well as the University of Costa Rica, located in San Juan, with project species. They've tried repopulating the rivers, and they found that once they get above where in elevation where the bananas and the palm oil is grown, those fishes survive. But that's a very narrow region, which is basically above 2,000-foot altitude, so you're talking about just a few miles of stream. We started releasing them in 1986 into the rivers and never got them back in subsequent explorations for the fishes. So we started cage cultures in those upper regions of those rivers, which were, again, above all the pesticide runoffs, and we were successful in keeping the fishes alive. They're still keeping those fish cages in those upper regions of those rivers, as well as rearing them at the University of San Juan in Costa Rica. We've worked the same situation with the government of Mexico with the high riverine rheophilic species from the Pyrenees complex, but that's more due to urban runoff, which is basically city runoff, drainage, sewers. There are a lot of unmonitored and unregulated practices that go on in Central America. I've written several articles about it. I gain no attention to it because those governments, of course, will service the multi-million-dollar agricultural concerns, and of course they still have unmonitored and unregulated urban runoff from their cities. So by placing many of these cichlids around the world, we are surviving the gene pools on these particular animals, which would totally be gone if it weren't for our efforts, as well as 2 or 3 other European efforts in keeping these animals alive.
Well, that's great. It sounds like a really some important work you're doing. Well, we're going to be at a break, and I want to talk with you a little bit more afterward on some of your bestsellers and some tips for hobbyists who are interested in maybe getting into this group of fish if they haven't really worked with them before. So let's take a short break to hear from our sponsors, and then we'll continue our discussion of New World cichlids with Don and get some more information on best husbandry practices.
Molly, here's your dinner. Zeus, that's not your food.
Don't let that happen to your precious cat. Elevate your cat's eating experience with the Cat Tree Tray. The Cat Tree Tray keeps your cat's food off the floor and conveniently located on the cat tree. It's the perfect way to eat. It's a beautiful wrought iron tray that easily attaches to your cat tree and keeps dogs and other critters out of your cat's dish. A must for multi-pet households. There's a 6-inch tray for large bowls and a 4-inch tray for smaller bowls. Purchase your Cat Tree Tray today. Go right now to cattreetray.com. That's cattreetray.com. CATTREETRAY.com.
Let's talk pets
Let's talk pets
on Pet Life Radio.
Pet Life Radio.
PetLifeRadio.com.
Okay, we're back, and welcome back to Aquarium Mania on Pet Life Radio. We're continuing our conversation with my guest, Don Conkle, owner of Don Conkle's Tropicals. So, Don, we've got a really good feel for your background and how you really got involved both on the production kind of commercial side as well as the natural resource side. Which of the fish that you're currently producing would you say are your best sellers?
Well, it depends. I mean, we ship globally to Europe, Southeast Asia, and America, we all have different preferences. America tends to be into the really big fish. It's kind of like you walk into a public aquarium and the most people are gathered around the largest fish at all. If they're mammals like dolphins or sharks, you find the crowds there. Of course, they notice the little fish and they're there in numbers, but not quite like the big fish. America has an appetite for large fish that we can't begin to keep up with the demand with. I'm talking about basically predatory fish. These fishes are found in all three zones, the lakes, the middle rivers, and the upper rivers. But as they're predatory fish at the apex of their environment, they get quite big and are basically piscivores. And also America tends to have very large tanks when it comes to cichlid keeping. Europe tends to be into more of the smaller fish. They like more of the substratum sifters, which are more peaceful, more of the herbivores, which are, again, slightly smaller in size. When I say that, I'm talking about ranges of 6 inches to 10 inches. Where the American market, the purchases from the people tend to be from 10-inch to 15-inch fish. When we come to Asia, they work in colors. Red, gold, orange are very popular with the Asians. In their homes, they represent prosperity as well as money influences. They're kept in according to colors, a little bit different than us Americans or our people across the pond in Europe.
Okay, so in America, which of the fish would you say tend to be the most popular, and maybe what are some of the important things to know about keeping those fish?
Well, in America, Cyclosoma feste from Ecuador, Cyclosoma umbroferus, which has now been identified as Cockatiya umbroferus. These are large animals that get a foot to 2 foot long. They are by far the most popular species, along with the large herbivores from the Vieja complex, Vieja argentea, Vieja regani, Vieja synspilus. These are fish that get large nuchal humps. Nuchal humps are large protrusion like a golf ball size on the forehead. America loves these large nuchal humps with these large fish.
What are the common names for some of these guys? Like if they were going to maybe to a store, or if they're talking with folks, what would be common names for these fish?
To be honest with you, I've been the one that's coined those names, as I was the first one to bring these animals into captivity.
Okay.
Like the Perneatrophilis dovi, which I did not get to, I coined the wolf cichlid. The Cyclosoma feste from Ecuador is called the red terror. The Umbroferus really doesn't have a name. These are more sophisticated stores. I cater more to the specialized stores, the retail stores, not to the vast franchise complexes like Petco, PetSmart. Those animals are serviced by the larger farmers from Florida, but they don't really get into large Central American cichlids. Mm-hmm. Those franchise stores basically carry the same common six that Ross Sokoloff introduced me to in 1983, those being firemouth Mickeys, Negro fasciatus, which is your convict cichlid. Those animals along that line, they carry Oscars, of course, which do get big, but they're very popular and well-known. As we service the high-end retail stores, basically they're going by the scientific name. They aren't promoted by common names, unfortunately, as they were early in the years. Basically, the Florida fish farmer who has been the one who has went by the common names.
Okay, so for some of the ones you mentioned, for example, the wolf cichlid or the red terror, what are some of the requirements for keeping these fish?
Predatory fish need large aquariums of at least 100 gallons. Basically, I'm talking about a 6-foot footprint, meaning you need a 6-foot tank. And those can come in 75 gallons, but 100 to 125 gallons are the most commonly used tanks to house large fish. Diet is one of the main concerns that when you come to these fish. That has not been addressed by the commercial industries who produce tropical fish food. I'm talking namely Tetra and Wardley's. They produce high-protein foods, which are great for Oscars and good for lake fish, like the Lake Malawi fish. But these Central American fish require a higher fiber in their diet. We are mixing all our fish. One of the most commonly asked questions is, what do you feed them, and what size tank do I put them in? Fishes that are under 10 inches can be kept well in 55-gallon to 100-gallon aquariums. Fishes over 10 inches require larger territory, and they require 100 to 125-gallon aquariums, though there are many, many customers who have much larger aquaria than these. But we're finding that the diet being the premier feature of keeping all these fishes alive. We mix koi food, which is high in fiber and low in protein, along with the common produced foods commercially by American vendors, which are very high in protein and very low in fiber. It's like eating a steak without eating a vegetable or eating a potato with it. It will harm the guts and the stomachs of these fishes, and they will get diseases. When the commercial food manufacturers come out with a high fiber, high protein feed, they will then encompass the material needs of these particular animals from Central and South America. So most everyone now is mixing koi food along with the average cichlid food or your average high protein food that's found in the stores or the wholesale manufacturers. Okay, so I guess going back to their origins, what would they be eating in nature that would give them more fiber? We've cut the guts open, the stomachs on these animals, and even your most predatory or most piscivore fish still contain 60 to 65% detritus in their stomachs and in their intestines. This fiber is comprised of fallen twigs, leaves, fruits, nuts, and decaying trees which fall by the river's edge or the lake's edge. This detritus or decaying material is over half of their contents in their stomachs. Though we look at a piscivore as eating guppies or goldfish, their true dietary requirements in nature are quite different than what we think. Okay. Now, what about mixing species? Can you mix species of these different fish together, or what are kind of territorial issues? Sure. Now, well, it's best done by their feeding behavior. The smaller fish tend to be substratum sifters and omnivores. Omnivores are fishes that basically go down to 6 to 10 feet. They're eating detritus, and they're eating algae. They're algae grazers because the sun can penetrate the upper 6 foot of a lake or the upper 6 feet of any river. Those fishes tend to grow smaller in numbers. They behave quite significantly different. They group flock. They work in large groups of fishes in the hundreds. They're kept up there because they don't want to go to the lower, deeper rivers or the lower sections of the lakes where the predatory fish hang out. The predatory fish prefer darker water. Their diet, though they do eat detritus, because the detritus is found throughout the lake's bottoms or the river bottoms. But these smaller fish are the ones that can be held in smaller aquariums, of course, being they're basically 6 to 8 inches. And those are the substratum sifters and the omnivores. Those are best kept together. Now, your larger herbivores that get to be large in size, 12 to 15 inches, along with your predatory fish, which basically grow 10 inches to 2 feet, are the best ones housed together. We're really looking at size as a requirement, size of the aquarium as a requirement for the large growing fishes. And, of course, smaller aquariums down to 30 gallons is quite applicable for fishes which do not get above 6 inches in length.
So for the smaller aquaria and maybe people that are getting started, what are some of the more common species, I guess, that would maybe be kind of more European in flavor, as you mentioned earlier? Which species would those be?
That would be, there are 3 genuses that are basically substratum sifters and omnivores. They are the Archocentrus, which are compromised, most commonly known by convicts or Negrofasciatus. But there are many of those different color variations. They're different species, such as Myrnae, which is known as topaz, Septum fasciatus, which common name is sunburst cichlids, Spinosystemus, which is called the pepper cichlid. These are fishes that only grow to 5-6 inches in length. Then your Therichthys species, which is most commonly known as the firemouth miki. We have the yellow miki from Guatemala, which is Therichthys affinis, Therichthys passionis, Therichthys helleri. Then we get into your Astateros grouping, which Dr. Leonard Rowe and myself coined in 1996. These are your substratum sifters, such as Astateros rostratus, which is your horse-nosed cichlid, Robertsoni, your turquoise cichlid, Altafrons, your bonnet cichlid, Rhytisma, your emerald cichlid. These different substratum sifters and the smaller omnivores are some of the most commonly started with fish. Many of these fishes can be housed in pairs in 29 to 30 gallon aquariums. Rarely do I suggest a hobbyist start a Central American tank with a 20-gallon tank. But the main feature of raising all these animals is to buy numbers of 6. The reason I say that, at the store they're going to be able to buy them at the cheapest, basically to a $8 cost per animal. And when they raise them in series of 6, they mainly want to breed them, as their behavior is what attracts people to Central American and South American animals. Being they hang in pairs, basically in smaller aquariums, they can be housed easily, and they can grow these animals up so they bond out. It's somewhat difficult to go out and buy 6-8-inch fishes from different stores and put them together and expect them to get along. Where if they raise them from smaller animals, let's say 1.5 to 3 inches, where they have time to bond out and grow together till they reach maturity, then they become quite peaceful in that arrangement of those bonded groupings.
Okay, so how long would it take if they got maybe an 2-inch fish before, they were starting to become mature and pairing up?
Basically, these animals need to be 4 inches to be mature. And we're talking about an average of 6 months in the local aquarium. That's under normal feeding conditions, which are 2 times a day.
So I guess another question you kind of talked a little bit about in the wild. Is there any specific water quality parameters like hardness or pH, anything like that would maybe be drastically different among some of these different groups?
With Central America, it's the same as Florida and most of the United States. They basically like pH requirements between 7 and 8. They're highly adaptable to the different pH levels. Our hardnesses are moderately hard. I know of nowhere in the United States that people can't keep cichlids quite easily in their aquariums. Now, the problem we have in America are with the Amazonian cichlids, which are a little farther south than the animals I've been speaking of. Their pH tolerances are a little bit more narrow. They prefer the 6.8 to the 7.2 water, which is more neutral. But by and large, America has hard water. high pH and high hardness. So, and same with Europe. Some of the Southeastern Asian people, we've noticed that these hard water fishes do quite well in their softer water of Southeast Asia. So they have quite wide tolerances of dealing with water chemistry.
So it sounds like there's definitely a lot of beauty and color to these fish, and their behaviors are really fascinating. And I know I've watched some of them myself. Where can someone go to get more information on some of these specific species? I know you've got some books potentially, or are there other sources? Do you want to talk about that real briefly?
People interested in cichlids, we have a great network called the American Cichlid Association, or the ACA. It's probably the largest association of fish keepers in America. Overseas, we have the BCA, which is in England, the British Cichlid Association. And in every country in Europe, they have their own cichlid associations. Now, we have here, for instance, in Tampa, the Tampa Bay Aquarium Society. Though the Tampa Bay people tend to keep about 1/3 cichlids and 2/3 other mixed species, it might be because of the fact that the vast majority of my animals are exported. Very few of the animals are sold in Florida. I do that as a business practice, though I do accommodate the local groups in Florida with the cichlids whenever they want and whatever they would like.
Okay.
But the Joint Local Aquarium Society is the best place to start, or the National American Cichlid Association.
That's great advice, definitely. Well, I've got so many more questions, but unfortunately we're out of time. I definitely want to thank you, Don, and our producers, including Mark Winter, for making this show possible. Are there any final words you have, Don? I'm going to do my best to try to get some pictures of your fish, and we'll definitely have your website on the web page for this show. But did you have any final words for our listeners?
Well, basically, we're dealing with two different types of businesses in America. We're dealing with the large franchise stores who carry what I call starter fish. They keep carrying the same 100 species over and over. The small shops, which have been pushed aside by these large franchise stores, have evolved over the last 10 years since franchising began. Those are your specialty stores. But they're starting to come back. Those specialty stores, they deal with fishes that they cannot get at the franchise stores. And we've noticed a large resurgence. Our sales are up 75% over the last 36 months, where I think some of the large franchise stores, their sales have basically been down about 25%. I think what's important, whether it's cichlids or just any type of tropical fish, is that we keep some of these gene pools that are disappearing in Africa, South America, and Central America viable. We don't realize how quickly the fish are disappearing, and only because of captive bred raising are we able to keep many of these fishes alive. And, of course, the interest has to be supplied by the hobbyist, but he goes back to the information from his store, whether it be a franchise store or a retail store with specific type fish or specialty fish. And to just keep these gene pools intact is what's going to be so important, not so much over the next 5 or 10 years, but much more so over the next 20 to 50 years.
That's great, Dan, and you're definitely right. There's a lot of changes going on, and hopefully we can keep many of these species that are going extinct in home aquaria and eventually, hopefully, released back into the wild. Thanks again, Don, for joining us. Please be sure to check out Don's web pages. We'll have those available on the Aquariumania show for this particular show's website. I encourage all of you to visit my Aquariumania blog on Pet Life Radio. I'll try to include more pictures there. Also, if you have any questions, comments, or ideas for a show, email me at drroy, that's DRROY, at petliferadio.com. If you're ever in Florida, please be sure to visit the Aquariumania exhibit at the Florida Aquarium in Tampa, one of my favorite aquariums. Until next time, please visit your local aquarium stores and keep your tanks clean and your fish healthy.
Let's Talk Pets, every week on demand, only on PetLifeRadio.com.